Yes guys, welcome back to 11 Yanks Breakdown, where we discuss all things USMNT. I'm Pete Altidore, and today we are discussing 7 key takeaways from the US versus Trinidad and Tobago game on January 31st. Now, a lot of people feel that this is a very underwhelming roster, and in a way, they're right. Not only are a lot of our best players playing in Europe not here, but even a lot of the young guys who play in MLS, who had really good seasons last year, who probably should have been here, were left out. I would have liked to see guys like Cole Bassett and Caden Clark, and it's disappointing that they're not there. That being said, there are still a couple of positions with the full national team that don't have a locked-in starter yet. And there are plenty of other positions where we need to continue to develop and build depth. So with that in mind, there are quite a few things that we can be watching for in this game that I think are relevant not only to the pool, but to the starting lineup. First though, let's go take a look at the final roster and some of the cuts that were made. Okay, so the 3 final goalkeepers that were selected were Matt Turner, JT Marcinkowski, and Matt Freese. Matt Freese is kind of interesting because he wasn't originally with the roster. He was brought in when David Ochoa got injured, and he managed to leapfrog Brady Scott, who was in the original roster, but isn't here now. Good to see Matt Turner in the final roster. In my opinion, he's going to start this game, and we're going to talk more about that later. The cuts were David Ochoa, who was injured. Sean Johnson was apparently also injured, according to a US Soccer release, and Brady Scott was released. Not sure what that means for Brady Scott's future with the US, but he's going to be playing for Austin this season, so he's still somebody to keep an eye on. David Ochoa has now been called in for 2 camps and got injured in both of them, so it'll be interesting to see if that affects his standing when it comes to Olympic qualifying in March. Matt Freese might have a chance to take that spot, or even guys like Damian Las or Choturu Udunze. Okay, so 5 fullbacks were chosen. Julian Araujo and Kyle Duncan and Aaron Herrera were the right backs, and George Bello and Sam Vines were the left backs. Not really sure why we needed to bring 3 right backs in. The 2 cuts that were made to the fullbacks was Chris Gloucester and Brian Reynolds. Real quick on Chris Gloucester, I think a lot of people felt that him getting called up into this camp was to kind of give him a platform to show what he can do and maybe get a team to pick him up now that he's been released by PSV Eindhoven. He's 20 years old already, and he hasn't even been able to become a starter for young PSV, and that should kind of tell you where his level is at the moment. Hopefully Chris Gloucester can go back to the Red Bulls and maybe try and get some playing time and rebuild his career in MLS. According to US Soccer, Brian Reynolds was released for personal reasons. That probably has something to do with his impending transfer to Serie A, whether that's Juventus or Roma. It's not abundantly clear. It keeps changing back and forth. Hopefully they sort that situation out fairly soon. Interesting center back roster. Aaron Long and Walker Zimmerman are there. Miles Robinson and Mauricio Pineda make the cuts from the under-23s. I like Miles Robinson. I'm curious to see if he can get a start. I've said my piece about Walker Zimmerman before. I don't think the guy is USMNT quality, but I understand why he's in this roster because we don't have a ton of other options. Pineda with the Fire is an interesting prospect because he can play with his feet, and as a center back, that's what Berhalter wants. The cuts are interesting. Henry Kessler and Abubakar Keita. Kessler had a very impressive season with New England. I just think he falls under one of those mediocre MLS players who's good, but never really going to be national team quality. I like Abubakar Keita. He's got a left foot, which we don't have a lot of in our center back pool, but he hasn't won the starting job yet with Columbus Crew, and maybe Berhalter felt like he just wasn't quite ready for a full call-up yet. Donovan Pines was brought in earlier when Julian Araujo was released because of illness, but my guess is he wasn't able to work his way into that senior roster call-up either. All 3 of these guys will go back to their clubs, and hopefully in 2021 they can continue to build on good seasons. Central midfielders: Sebastian Lletget, Christian Roldan, Andres Perea, Tanner Tessman, Jackson Ewell, and Kellen Acosta. Now, 2 of these guys shouldn't be here in my opinion. Kellen Acosta and Christian Roldan, both of them I've said my piece about. They've never done anything to convince me that they belong with the USMNT. I'm excited to see Andres Perea. He filed the one-time switch from Colombia to the US, so he'll be available for this game. Tanner Tessman quietly had a very good season for Dallas last year, can play either as a 6 or as an 8, so I'm curious to see what he can do. Sebastian Lletget, Mr. Reliable. Every time he plays for the US, this guy plays really well. The other midfielder that was called up was Benji Michel. I don't rate Benji Michel very highly based on what I've seen from him in Orlando, but I don't really have a problem with him being here. The cuts that were made seem fine to me. Brian Kao is the most talented of the 3, but he still has a long way to go, particularly when it comes to his passing and keeping possession of the ball. Eric Williamson and Hassani Dotson is really more just of the same. mediocre MLS midfielders that aren't really national team material. Forwards, Daryl Dike, Jozy Altidore, Chris Mueller, Paul Arriola, Jesus Ferreira, and Jonathan Lewis. How Jonathan Lewis continues to get national team camps when he's not even a starter for Colorado is beyond me. Jesus Ferreira is intriguing. The kid played well in his last call-up in January last year, but then had a terrible season for Dallas. Didn't impress me at all. I probably wouldn't have called him up to this, but maybe Berhalter saw something in camp that he liked and wants to keep him here. Jozy Altidore and Daryl Dike will jostle for that number 9 spot, and Paul Arriola and Chris Mueller will very likely start at both wings. The cuts are Jordan Morris, Jeremy Ebobisse, and Georgi Mihailovic. Obviously, Morris got cut because he was going to Swansea, and that deal has been finalized. Real quickly on that, guys, I've heard a lot of back and forth of whether or not Jordan Morris is good enough for Swansea, or if he's too good for Swansea, or if that's his level. We need to think about Morris in terms of the type of player he is, instead of how good he is, quote unquote. He's a guy that's very good in transition, okay? He's not great in tight spaces when you're trying to keep possession of the ball and break down defending lines, but he's very good in transition. He's got pace, he can get in behind, he's athletic, he's strong, he's a good finisher. Swansea is typically a possession team, but maybe they felt like they wanted to add a different dimension to their attack, somebody who's good in transition. And if they get promoted and Jordan Morris makes the move, he could be a Premier League winger. So I think it's a great move for Jordan Morris. Jeremy Ebobisse, guys, is a poacher finisher, but I don't think his level is really national team level. Same with Georgi Mihailovic. He had a decent season with Chicago last year, but a lot of these guys on this roster are just basic players. They can do the basics well, but they don't really offer anything interesting or special, and the same goes for Georgi Mihailovic. Alright, so that's the roster for you. Let's go ahead and dive into the 7 reasons why we should pay close attention to this game. 1. Can Matt Turner challenge Stefan for the number 1 jersey? Now, this has been a source of a lot of fighting on Twitter. There are certain people who feel that Matt Turner is a better shot stopper than Zach Steffen, and I'm not convinced that's true. Steffen is definitely better with his feet and has improved at Manchester City, but Matt Turner has absolutely had a lights-out season for New England. Can he do it for the USMNT? That's what we need to see today. I don't think he's ready to take the number 1 jersey from Steffen personally, but you want competition. You want him to be pushing him. You don't want Zach Steffen getting too comfortable. That's what we want across all of our positions. Depth that is pushing the number 1 and keeping them on their toes and making sure they show up to every game and put in a performance, otherwise they're going to steal their spot. Not only that, if your number 1 guy gets injured, you don't want there to be a big gap between the number 1 and the number 2 guy, otherwise you weaken your lineup. You want the number 2 guy to be just about there, very, very close, so that you don't drop the level just because your first choice player is unavailable. Hopefully Matt Turner gets the start in this game. I'm going to be watching him very carefully, particularly how he does with his feet. He has been okay playing out of the back for New England this season, but they don't do it that often, so it's been hard to judge how he does in possession of the ball, and that's crucial to Gregg Berhalter's system, so definitely something to watch for. 2. Can Julian Araujo become a true attacking fullback? Now, Julian Araujo's strengths are that he's a really solid, aggressive 1v1 defender. LA Galaxy played him as a winger for most of this season, which was baffling to me because Julian Araujo isn't exactly a top-level attacking player. He's not Serginho Dest or even Reggie Cannon or Brian Reynolds in that respect. Now, there's nothing wrong with that per se, but in order to play in Gregg Berhalter's system where his wingers pinch in and his fullbacks provide the width, we have to see if Julian Araujo can fit in that system. We saw it somewhat against El Salvador, but that wasn't the greatest test in the world because they were so disorganized and so poorly set up tactically. So I want to be watching what Araujo does in possession of the ball when we face Trinidad and Tobago. I have every reason to believe Araujo will start. He should start ahead of Aaron Herrera or Kyle Duncan, both of whom are very mediocre MLS fullbacks. Looking forward to see what this young man can do. Number 3, can Miles Robinson work himself into the center back conversation? Now, Miles Robinson struggled this last year with Atlanta, but so did the entire team. They didn't have a proper coach, but Robinson has showed in the past that he can be a very solid center back, particularly in possession of the ball. Now, I don't think Robinson has the same ceiling as a Mark McKenzie or Chris Richards, but he could absolutely be one of those depth guys and should definitely be fighting for a spot in the Olympic roster. I'm very curious to see him both with and without the ball. The left back conundrum. This is an interesting one because Sam Vines has had 2 caps now for the national team. He played well against El Salvador, and he played well last January when I think we faced Costa Rica. Sam Vines' strengths are that he's good positionally and he's very good defensively, and going forward, he puts a good cross in. The only thing is that when you compress space and you give him little time, he struggles to get out of tight spaces. Technically, I would say he's somewhat average. George Bello offers us something different. He's a much more natural attacking left back than Sam Vines. He's better technically, his crossing is not as good, and the past few years we've seen his defensive positioning and his tendency to switch off hurt him. Now, we've seen Sam Vines twice. I wouldn't mind seeing George Bello for this game start because I want to see what he offers that is different to Sam Vines. Remember, left back is still not exactly nailed down. I think Anthony Robinson is definitely a candidate for left back, but you want at least 2 or 3 guys competing for that position. And no, I don't think Serginho Dest should be playing at left back. So whether we see George Bello or Sam Vines in this game, both of them have the opportunity to put themselves in the conversation for, at the very least, backup left back in the senior roster, and if not, starting left back for the Olympic roster. This is probably one of the most interesting parts of this game to me, watching who's going to be at left back and how they're going to play. Number 5, can Tanner Tessman and Andres Perea dominate the midfield? Now, I don't know that either of these guys are going to start. Gregg Berhalter might go Jackson Yueill at the 6, Christian Roldan at the 8, and Sebastian Lletget at the 10. Personally, I hope not. I like Jackson Yueill, but I think we've seen what he's all about and we've seen what he can do. I would like to see what Andres Perea offers, especially now that he's made that switch. Give him the start at the 6 and see what he can do. Tanner Tessman had a very, very good season with Dallas. He's still young. I think he deserves a look at the 8. He's a very athletic, strong, box-to-box midfielder. And for a guy who's so big, he's surprisingly technical. But what I really like about Tanner Tessman is his intelligence in possession of the ball. You can tell he was developed in that FC Dallas system, which prioritizes technical players who can keep the ball in tight spaces. I just think Tanner Tessman has a very high ceiling, and I want to see him now. I'm happy to see Sebastian Lletget as a 10. You always know you're going to get not only a very hardworking shift, but a very good attacking shift from him. So yeah, I'm hoping for an Andres Perea, Tanner Tessman, Sebastian Lletget midfield. 6, can Chris Mueller build on a good game against El Salvador? Chris Mueller was probably one of the most effective attackers against El Salvador after a really, really strong season for Orlando. He looks like a revitalized winger under Oscar Perea, and at 24 years old, he's not eligible for the Olympics, but he should absolutely be trying to put himself in a conversation for at least a depth role on the senior winger chart. He'll be competing with the likes of Conrad de la Fuente, Uli Yanez, Jordan Morris, and Tim Weah for winger depth, and I want to see what he does against Trinidad and Tobago. Now, obviously, Trinidad and Tobago isn't exactly a world-class side, but they are better than a really weak El Salvador team that didn't even train together before the game and was set up so poorly tactically. 7, will Gregg Berhalter go for youth or experience up front? So the number 9 role is wide open. And there's Daryl Dike in the squad, who I really want to see, and Jozy Altidore in the squad, who I've seen many, many times and has been a great servant. But like I've said before, guys, I think he's past it. People keep talking about him as when he is fit and healthy and engaged, and I just haven't seen him be fit, healthy, or engaged for several years now. Also, this might be Daryl Dike's last chance to show Berhalter what he can do, because come March, there's 4 strikers in Europe that are looking for a call-up too: Sargent, Hoppy, Soto, and Giallachini. So this might be Daryl Dike's last chance to show what he can do. I don't know if he's going to start or if he goes with Jozy Altidore. To Jozy Altidore's credit, it's possible he said to Berhalter, I want to be involved with this cycle. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to get fit. I'm going to be mentally and physically engaged in the game. And I want to compete for a spot at the number 9. Some people think that his experience is a good thing for the young players. I'd rather see Daryl Dike in this game, but whether it's Daryl Dike or Jozy Altidore, I'm going to be watching how they play, how they move off the ball. Do they come really deep and hold up the play? How is their movement in the final 10 yards, their finishing, their technique, their combination, their physicality? And whether it's Jozy or Dike, the number 9 spot for the national team isn't locked down, and both of these guys have a chance to say, it's me, watch, here we go. As always, guys, thanks for watching. After the Trinidad and Tobago game, I'm going to go live on YouTube. We'll just do a hangout and talk about the game. I'll see you all then. Have a fantastic week, and I will see you all right after the game.